And welcome everyone to Beyond the Forecasts. It is Monday, June 23rd. It is hot and sunny. So I apologize for having sunglasses on, but man, it is one of those days where if you can, stay in the air conditioning and also make sure you have the sunblock, make sure you have a hat, make sure you have the sunglasses. It is just one of those summer days where it is just straight up hot for northern Michigan. And very bright and very sunny. So if you do want to get out and enjoy, remember the things to take precautions of. Stay hydrated, as well as keep yourself cool. Take breaks in this sunshine and this heat, because it doesn't take long for your body to overheat. So enjoy it. But I'm going to tell you right now, personally, me, this is too hot. I am not built for this. But because of the heat, because of the humidity, because of everything associated with the heat in northern Michigan, we have two things today to keep you safe from this heat. Meteorologist John Gross is going to take you into the heat index, why we have the heat index, why we tell you about the heat index, and why it's important. So meteorologist John Gross is going to take you into that first, and then he's going to take you into the humidity and dew points, why those are important. And it all factors back into the heat index. So we have heat items today because of our heat advisories and extreme heat warnings that we have for much across the Great Lakes region. With the heat, with the humidity, the heat indices could be 100, 105 plus. Yesterday, our temperatures, Sunday the 22nd, were in the mid 90s, close to upper 90s in spots. With the heat index, we were well over 100, possibly upwards of 105 or more in some locations. And even overnight lows were broken. The record low-high temperature was broken in Gaylord, 78 degrees. So, as we are working through the next few days with this heat, we're going to continue to bring you the information to keep you safe for these mini heat waves that we get here in northern Michigan. They didn't like what I was saying. So we are going to bring you that information for today. And then as we head into tomorrow, a little bit more about the heat, why we're seeing this heat with things like the jet stream. So that's what's coming up today on today's episode. But first, before we get into that, let's jump into the fun facts off the top. First up, this day in weather history. So this day, June 23rd, 1957, a few miles west of Fort Stockton, Texas, softball-sized hail injured 21 people unable to find shelter. Most of them were farm laborers or farm workers, and some livestock were killed. Softball-size hail. So softball-size hail. Take your hand and kind of cup like that. That's softball size. That's ridiculous. We had hail this past weekend in Traverse City, and it was about the size of a $50. That blew my mind. I can't imagine this rocketing from the sky. And not just one, a lot of them. That's insane to me. But that was this day, back 1957. All right, trivia time. Friday, we asked you, we want to know balls of ice that fall from clouds are often during thunderstorms are known as what? We just talked about it. Hail. So that was the answer from Fridays. Now today we want to know, what is the driest desert? Is it the Atacama Desert, Sahara Desert, the Gobi Desert, or Arctic Desert? QR code right there. Hit it with your phone. It'll take you to where you can answer. Put in your answer and we'll give that to you tomorrow on Beyond the Forecast. Again, Atacama, Sahara, Gobi, or Arctic. Weigh in now. All right, viewer photo of the day. This is always brought to you by Great Rooms, and today's picture comes to us from Patrick Hayner. He sent in this beautiful sunset from Ludington, Stern Beach to be exact. Thank you, Patrick, for sending in this amazing sunset, as we tend to see here in northern Michigan, the amazing views that are. So Patrick, thank you so much for sending that in. All right, let's get to our show, shall we? Sending it over to meteorologist John Gross. He is going to talk to you about the heat index, why we give it to you, why it's important, because it has to do with your skin, sweating, and how you stay cool. We'll have more details on that right after the break.
Hey there, everybody. Meteorologist John Gross. Welcome back to Beyond the Forecast. As we are getting into the summer months, you might hear us reference what we call the heat index in our forecasts, whatever it might be, now that we're starting to talk about more heat, building especially here in northern Michigan. So what exactly is the heat index? Well, you can think of the heat index the same way we think of wind chill in the wintertime. It's giving you more of that feels like temperature, feels like on your bare skin. So here's the actual definition of it. We're measuring how hot it really feels when the relative humidity is factored in with the actual air temperature. That's the broad definition of what the heat index is. So here's an example. When you're talking about just the air temperature, it could be a very hot, sunny day during the summertime, easily can achieve temperatures in the 90s. So here we are at 96 degrees and our relative humidity is at 65%. So when you combine those two, your feels like temperature to what it feels like to you on your bare skin, if you're outside, 121 degrees. Very, very hot conditions. So the National Weather Service will issue procedures when heat indices are expected to exceed 105 to 110 degrees plus for 2 consecutive days or more. Hence what we call a heat wave when we're talking about those very hot conditions. So here's a very useful chart that the National Weather Service has put together, and there is a very similar one that we have shown in our show when we were talking about wind chill during the winter time. But instead of relative humidity, we were tracking the wind speed. So for the summertime, we're just replacing that with the relative humidity. So in the example we were talking about, temperature at 96, relative humidity at 65, you go down the 2 columns and you find where they meet, and that's how we get our feels like temperature right there at 121 degrees. Now, when you're really starting to get into the triple digits, especially where you have the oranges and those red boxes, that's when we start to talk the heat becoming dangerous if you're not careful. You need to make sure if you're outside for a longer period of time, especially in the direct sunlight, you're taking care of yourself, staying hydrated, taking breaks in the AC or the shade, wearing light-colored clothing, loose-fitting clothing. That can just help to keep you a few degrees cooler. Because if not, we run into situations, unfortunately, like this, where we have to talk about heat exhaustion, or even in some instances, heat stroke. And it can be a very serious situation. So some of the main things we look for: dizziness. Do you have a headache? Thirsty? Are you craving water? Heavy sweating? Nausea? Are you feeling weak? Confusion, dizziness, or even in some instances, passing out, becoming unconscious. So heat exhaustion is one of the less severe, at least of the two. Now, don't get me wrong, these are both should be taken very, very seriously, but heat exhaustion usually comes before you get to heat stroke. So if you think that you are suffering from heat exhaustion, just a few good things you can do: move to a cooler area, loose clothing, sip on some cool water, maybe put a wet towel on yourself to try and cool yourself off. And if you need to, seek medical attention if your symptoms don't improve. Because right here, heat exhaustion can lead to a heat stroke. And when you're talking about a heat stroke, that's when it becomes very, very serious. You want to make sure you're taking action immediately. If you need to, call 911, move that person to a cooled area, loosen the clothing, and remove any extra layers, cool them with water, or even an ice bath to just try and get their internal body temperature down. Because right here, heat stroke can cause death or permanent disability if emergency treatment is not given. This information is not meant to scare you, but it is meant to inform you and keep you aware of the signs when we're talking about temperatures, especially in the summertime where we can reach the triple digits. So some things that you can do to prevent yourself from ever incurring heat exhaustion or even heat stroke. And one of the main ones that we always highlight: never leave pets or kids inside a parked vehicle, even if it's only for 5 to 10 minutes, because the temperature inside a vehicle, especially if it is left in the direct sunlight, you can get those temperatures easily back into the triple digits within 10 to even near 15 minutes. So trying to avoid that. A lot of newer vehicles even have a feature on the dash that tells you to remind yourself to check your back seat so you're not leaving anybody behind. Drinking water, staying hydrated. We know in the summertime, you might go out to the beach, you might go on the boat. There might be alcoholic beverages included for those of age. And we're not saying to not enjoy yourself, but make sure you're taking care of yourself. If you are drinking, make sure that you also are drinking plenty of water. So you're making sure that you're keeping yourself hydrated. Remember, your body is made up of around 2/3 of water. So if you're losing that water from sweating, because your body is just naturally trying to cool off, you need to replenish it. So making sure that you're staying hydrated. Reducing strenuous activities. Obviously, we have several people who work outside. Maybe it's construction, whatever it might be, and you're susceptible to the elements if you're in that direct sunlight. So trying to just take breaks. Going into our next bullet point, finding shade, trying to take a break if you can, maybe in the air conditioning, even if it's for just 5 or 10 minutes, just giving yourself that extra time to cool off your body, to give yourself a little bit of a break before you head back into those very hot conditions. And one last thing, and we mentioned this earlier, wearing lightweight, light-colored clothing. Take my suit, for example. It's a darker blue, so it's going to absorb more sunlight versus if we were wearing a white shirt. That's going to absorb less sunlight. If you walk on asphalt or blacktop, you notice that your feet are very, very hot. You find that surface to be very, very hot. That's because the black, or at least that color, it's helping to absorb more sunlight. So it's retaining more heat. So it's the same type of philosophy if you're wearing light-colored clothing versus dark-colored clothing. So that can just help to keep you a little bit cooler when we're talking about summertime and we're talking about heat index. I'm meteorologist John Gross reporting for Beyond the Forecast.
Thanks, John. Now coming up, John's going to be back with us to talk about dew points and humidity. We'll have that right after the break for you.
Hey there, everybody. Meteorologist John Gross. Welcome back to Beyond the Forecast. Today, we are going to be talking all about humidity and the dew point. And what exactly does that number mean to yourself and myself when we're talking about the forecast? Now that we're starting to get into the warmer months of summer, we're in June when this was recorded. We're getting into July here very soon, August, the prime summer months, especially here in northern Michigan. And this is usually the time frame when we have to talk a little bit more about the humidity and or just what the dew point is. So we know temperature, that's just giving us how cold, how warm, how it feels to us on our bare skin. But when we're talking about dew point, here's a look at the current dew points as this is being recorded. Now, when you get the numbers near, if not above 60, that's usually the key number that we're looking for when we're talking about dew points. As you can see right now, areas into the eastern UP, you're talking about some upper 50s. So you're very close to that magic number. However, south of the Mackinac Bridge, plenty of numbers are exceeding that 60-degree mark, in the low to even some mid-60s. So once we start to get the numbers above 60, that's when you really start to at least notice that heavier feeling, that muggy feeling. If you're out and about, maybe outside doing some yard work, maybe you're at the beach enjoying one of the nicer, warmer days that we do have. But again, this is highlighting the amount of moisture content that we have in the atmosphere. So here's a good chart to really drive home what we mean when we're talking about dew point and humidity. So here's a look at those numbers. Now, usually when you're talking about a very warm and humid air mass, again, you're talking about temperatures in the 80s, 90s, but you also are talking about your dew points a little bit higher than that. 60 or higher, that's when it really starts to become more noticeable. 60 or less, more refreshing. Not as noticeable, usually more of a dry air mass. So here's a look at our chart. Now, when you're talking about dew points 55 degrees or less. That's usually, especially during a summer day, a very dry air mass. Meaning we're not talking about a lot of moisture, not only at the surface, but even going in the mid-levels of the atmosphere. So the atmosphere, well, it doesn't have a lot of moisture to work with. So usually in those types of scenarios, you're not talking about a lot of rain chances or shower chances. It's usually a drier day. Remember, when you're talking about rain, when you're talking about pop-up thunderstorms, or even when you're talking about the chance for severe storms, one of the main ingredients that you need is the moisture. And if you don't have the moisture, well, you're probably not going to see much out there. So let's go to the next category. When you're talking about dew points 55 to even near 60 degrees, starts to become a little bit more noticeable. Still can at least handle it for most people outside, especially if you have to be outside for a longer period of time. But once you're starting to get into the upper 50s, near 60, good word again, it's becoming noticeable. It's not overbearing. It's not completely comfortable, but you notice it's there. Once we start to get above 60, that's when you really start to at least feel it. Depending maybe on the type of hair that you have, hairstyle, your hair might get a little more frizzy, might not be as straight sometimes, or however you're styling your hair, myself included, getting ready for an evening show on the news. So that's what you're talking about when you start to get those numbers above 60, 60 to near 65, 65 to 70, that's when it's just downright muggy. The air is very heavy. You just feel the extra moisture content in the atmosphere. You might not think about it that way, but that's pretty much scientifically what is happening. You're getting your temperature, you're getting your dew point closer together. Remember, when you have your temperature and your dew point very close together, if not the same, that's when you have what's called saturation. So that can lead to cloud development, that can lead to better rain chances, and even for the overnight going into the early morning hours, and that also can lead to fog development. So when you're talking about the temperatures, and then especially your dew points, very hot, very humid, once we get our dew points near 70 or plus, that's when it's downright tropical. What I mean by that is if you've ever been on a trip, maybe Florida, near the Gulf Coast, you could go towards the Caribbean, Jamaica, any of the islands as you're going a little bit farther away from the United States. Getting closer to the equator is pretty much what I'm trying to drive home here. You've got a lot more moisture in those areas. You have a lot more heat because the direct rays of the sun are more focused closer to the equator, and you have plenty of water nearby from the Caribbean Sea, from the Gulf, from the Atlantic Ocean, things of that nature. So once you start to get your dew points above 70, that's when we just call it, well, downright tropical. But that's the difference between dew points that are fairly refreshing versus, well, very, very muggy. I'm meteorologist John Gross, reporting for Beyond the Forecast.
Thanks again, John. Coming up, we're going to be ending the show, talking about a few things coming up, but also saying goodbye. We'll have that right after the break. And welcome back, everyone, to Beyond the Forecast. Someone said, I would prefer 9 degrees. I would too. Some say, I'd rather have this than the 9 months of cold. To each their own. But when it comes to heating up or cooling down, what do you think wastes more energy? Believe it or not, heating up is much easier to do than cooling down. And it all has to do with thermodynamics. In fact, it's the second law of thermodynamics for the most part. But it all has to do with entropy. Getting warmer air is easier than cooler air. That's why you tend to see rolling blackouts when you have these heat waves, because everyone's turning on the process of cooling air down. Unlike when it's massive cold and you have heaters just going, it's much easier to make warm air than it is to make cold air. So yes, if you're in the agreement or the boat with me, I'd rather have cooler air. You're not wrong. Be good, stay safe, take care. For meteorologist John Gross, meteorologist Haley Fischetti, I'm Chief Meteorologist Michael Stevens. Have a wonderful and safe Monday evening. We'll catch you right back here tomorrow, Tuesday, 4:30. Bye, everybody.